And as I teach, I'm always conflicted about giving handouts because I know myself. If somebody's talking and they give me a handout, I pay attention to the handout, not to the person. But on the other hand, there are things I wanted to send you home with around this stuff. And so I decided to at least have you have some of this stuff in front of you. And then at the end, there are a few things that you have, if you want to take it from here, which you will see us getting to the 10 Commandments of relationship. Since we are here to be revealed to this time of revelation. Should I start? I love teaching. I love standing in front of people. And I say, as a therapist, I'm a rabbi therapist. As a rabbi, I'm a preacher, which means I come and think, what has inspired me, and how can I inspire you? How can I bring you up, given this time of Shavuot, a time of revelation, a time where historically we meet with God. And we were all there. The stories are amazing. And in reading the Torah, something that has bothered me for years is that why all of this tzoros? You know, it's like a story, even when they're doing well, the chapter has to end, and the people rebelled, and God killed off another 1,000 people, or another 2,000 people, or was going to get rid of everybody. One can take this to mean that we have original sin, we have the human condition of always rebelling and not wanting to be told what to do, and that we have to learn this. But maybe there's something more in this. And this came together for me when, and I've said this in several other talks that I've given, my friend Bert Vysotsky, as we were talking about this, said when he first was at JTS, he's still at JTS, now he's teaching, that he was a student, Shaul Lieberman said to him, the main tragic figure in the Torah is God. And I've been thinking about that ever since, over the last couple of years. And I thought when Barry Bergman invited me to give this talk, I'm going to get into it and say what this means to me. Got that? And so what did I think of? And this I've added to because I like these quotes. First is the Hemingway quote, which is used in a video, in fact, that I show my students called Broken Places. The world breaks everyone, and afterwards, some are strong in the broken places. What I want to suggest to you is this image that I've come to explore, and I'm not saying this is what the Torah is really saying to everybody. It's a radical rereading of the Torah, but the great thing about the Torah is it's here after 3,000 years, which means it has addressed us in different spaces, in different times, for different needs. And I would like to suggest to you that this is what's happening to God in the Torah. Life that God creates breaks God too, and through breaking, God learns how to deal with people. That's the story of the Torah from the beginning, when it's tohu vavohu, till the end, when Moshe dies. So let me bring you through that. Let me also say that the reason this intrigues me is in this video, Max Cleland, who was the senator from Georgia and then the head of the VA, I think he died about 2 years ago if I'm not mistaken, very interesting guy. He had his legs blown off in Vietnam, and Carter made him head of the VA, I think. What?
He's a great person.
Great person, right? And those two quotes, first of all, he said, I didn't always think that power could come from a broken heart, or the divine path can be seen in tragedy, but now I believe. That I found out really as the end when I were preparing for this, but it fit in with all of this stuff. what's going on with God and people and this attacks and these killings and this development is really a religious process that's happening. And he says, people don't want to hear about your successes. They want to hear about your failures and your challenges. When I teach, and I teach students in a master's program, they're going for their licensure to become therapists. They enter my classroom thinking they know nothing about therapy, and they want to come and have me teach them, oh, if you want to do therapy, do this and do that and do this. And if you tell that to your clients, then you're going to be a good therapist. That's total bullshit. In fact, Carl Rogers would say, if you're going to tell them that kind of thing, you must think they're pretty stupid. So what you want to do is show the clients what they have. And the students kind of believe that they have nothing. And it's my job to help show them that they are healers, that they are helpers, that they've done it with their kids. They've done it in their own lives. And let me suggest to you that this is what's happening in Torah. God is showing us through God's own narrative, or if we can think of it, the narrative that is given to us in the Torah is one that shows the divine as the creator, the spirit, that which we aspire to be a force which keeps trying over and over to connect. Which makes sense to me as a therapist, because that's what I do. You know, you offer connection, you offer respectful relationship to create a healing. And looking through this, I hit, first of all, Kohelet, Yechezkel. Two are better than one, for should they fall, one can raise the other. But woe betide they who are alone, and falls with no companion to raise them. Further, when two lie together, they are warm. But how can he who is alone get warm? Also, if one attacks, two can stand up to him. A later source, but perhaps this is what God is doing. So let me take three eras, three parts of what's going on. One is creation. The second is Ma'amad Bahar Sinai, Revelation. And the third is the ending of the Torah, to show you what I'm thinking about. And then I'll talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then ask for a discussion about this. I'll tell you what I don't want in the discussion. Don't tell me, how about that other part of the Torah, and the other part of this, and the other part of this? That goes in my mind. It happens, I know this. The real question for you is, how does this touch you in a way that can help you be the person you want to be? To see the story of God in the Torah in this way. I told you I'm a therapist, right? So I'm always doing therapy. I can walk on the beach and do therapy. And God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. Okay? So we are the creation of God, but we're the creation of God. We're being told that if you want to know what God is like, look at another person. That's where you'll find the best way of seeing God and what God means. And God created humankind in the divine image, creating male and female. They live in Gan Eden for 3 sentences before they're out, right? You would think they would give them at least a chapter to have time together, to enjoy each other and stuff like that. No, the story really is not about God creating the perfect place. The story is how God deals with a creature of will that God has created. And how do you deal with that in any relationship is what I'm saying to you. Very interestingly, they eat from the tree of knowledge, right? And God says, now that humankind has become like us, knowing good and bad, what if one should stretch out a hand and take from the tree of life and eat and live forever, ever? What's happened? What kind of God is this? You made them, you can create them, you can change them, what you want to do. In fact, what God is doing is creating the other and realizing how difficult it is to live with the other. And God's even own sense of, my God, they could really live forever? What am I going to do with them then? And it's one story after the other of God encountering the other and trying to figure out how to have a relationship that's going to be successful. So first there's that impact of what are they going to do? I'm going to kick them out of the Garden of Eden. They can't be here anymore. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all because I want the other. I want somebody different from me, right? I liked creating them, but we have to work through something. In relationship theory and psychotherapy, they talk about 3 stages of relationship. One is romance. You're attracted to the other person. Wow, you are wonderful. I've never felt this good before. Hey, wow, that's what they created sex for. You could have this connection that was high and beautiful and transformed you. Next is power and control. What do you mean you throw your shirt on the floor before you go to bed? What is it that, I can't stand you, in fact. How did I ever be attracted to you? And the third is co-creation, which 2 famous theorists of relationships, Julie and John Gottman, who does tremendous research on couples, says, if you track successful couples for 40 years, they are still fighting about the same things they fought 40 years ago, but it doesn't matter as much. So what is this transformation that God is going to go through? One of the things God does, even in kicking out Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, is something very tender. He makes them clothes. What a touching kind of thing. You've gone against me. I'm worried about you. I can't control you. But I'm going to give you a little present before I kick you out of here so you'll be able to deal with the shame that you're feeling. This notion of, yes, we can have separation. We could have consequences, but we could do it compassionately is something that one of the things that I'm learning from the Torah and from God if we look at it this way. Because in a way, relationships are the hardest things we have to deal with in life. Relationships between us and our friends, us and our partners, us and our spouses, but also countries. How do we deal with that when it's impossible? But yet, how do we create that? Second, the revelation at Sinai and what happens with Moshe. So God is looking all over. He tries, Adam and Eve. That doesn't quite work out. Cain and Abel? Really? And then we have the Tower of Babel, right? And then we have Noah. Going to get rid of that whole generation except for one set of families that then comes through. He then chooses Abraham. And Abraham kind of works out pretty well, but we keep going. And through this development, through Yosef and coming to Egypt and having all of this power, through the evil Pharaoh coming who didn't know Joseph, and the suffering of the Jews that was predicted at the beginning of the Torah, in fact, 400 years of suffering. And God comes to Moshe and says, you're the guy for me. You're going to lead the Jews out of Egypt. And what does Moshe say? Are you kidding? I can't even talk. Who are you talking? And God says, okay, I'll get your brother in. He can talk for you. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. And finally, he's convinced to do that. That anivut, that sense of humility, is who God has been looking for all of this time. Because God, from the beginning, has said, I'm worried about what these people are going to do to me. I'm worried about giving them too much power. I'm worried about seeing them as better than me or more than me or whatever. And Moshe is not that. Moshe has had a very interesting background, who has been born Jewish, been raised Egyptian, in the house of the God king. So he's used to gods and people powerfully. And then he has to run away and becomes an immigrant in a foreign country. And there is where God finds him and brings him in.
And in the Passover on Haggadah, we read that God said that you would be enslaved for 400 years. So why would you want to enslave people with that degradation and the deaths of so many Jews in Egypt and then have redemption?
Maybe I know, I was going to go straight through and then have questions, but it's good. I'll tell you something that they taught me when I went to Lubavitch, a song that I still remember. And I'll go that in that say. V'im tomar, lama neshama yorda lamata. V'im tomar, lama yorda lamata. Ay, v'yesh lomar, aliyat tzricha yerida. Ay, v'yesh lomar, aliyat tzricha yerida. And if you should ask, why does a soul have to come down from heaven? And if you should ask, why to go up you have to come down? There are those who say you can't go up until first you've come down. There are those who say you can't appreciate what you have until it's gone. And I think that may be a part of it too, but who the hell knows? I don't. But God decides, in fact, at some point, I'm pleased with this people. I've created them. I am going to have this great wedding with them, really, on Mount Sinai tonight, right? I'm going to have a time where I can show myself to them and to the whole people, to all of these people before and in the future. And we're going to have this great relationship forever. How long does it last? Out of this, in reaction to this, just like Adam and Eve pay more attention to the serpent than they do to God, the people, in getting this greatness, by the way, right, they've had this amazing experience with God. They're the first to hear God, to be with the whole people and having this experience of this connection. Moses goes up, they're saying, wait, we can't live without this. We need a God. And they create the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. Just the opposite, right, of what's going to happen. God has to learn how to live with this notion of approach and avoidance. Because every relationship is a dance. Every relationship is the coming towards, you like that, huh? And going against. And so Moshe comes down from the mountain, and God says to him, you know what? I'm going to get rid of this whole people. Just like I did with Noach, I got rid of all of the rest of the people. And for Moshe, you're going to be the one who's going to be the head of this new people that I'm going to create. In choosing Moshe is the bride, perhaps, that can stand up to God. And what Moshe says in this text is just amazing to me. He has such chutzpah. He says to him, first of all, if you do that, God, you cannot use my name in your Torah. I refuse to give you the copyright of my name. I will have nothing to do with you. Not only that, God, but remember when you made Adam and Eve and you were so scared about what's going to happen to you from the reaction of people here? You know what people are going to say about you? They're going to say, you chose people and then you wiped them out. Who's going to believe in you, God? And God says, you're right. I'm only going to have to kill off a few people who are really the ringleaders. But in fact, I will stick in with this people, even though I'm going through this. That transformation of God by his interaction with Moshe is something that is just an amazing mature level of maturity for God in this level, is what I'm thinking. And to see it that way, so much so that Moshe, with all of this chutzpah, then says to God, hey God, you know, you tell me about yourself, you don't even tell me your name, come on, show me your face. And God says to Moshe, well, you can't see my face and live. We are not in this power relationship. I'm up here and you're down here, and it can't possibly work in that way. However, but what I'm willing to do for you is I'm willing to pick you up. Remember the clothing of Adam and Eve? I'm willing to pick you up and put you, Moshe, in the cleft of the rock so you can see the world the way I see the world. You can see over my shoulder. This connection is just so powerful and so romantic and so touching that God is learning not only how to interact with people and how to forgive people and how to go half of the way, but also learning how to develop the relationship. Now let's go to the third part, Moshe's death. End of Torah, last chapter. Moshe really wants to go into the promised land, right? And God says, you can't. You're not destined for it. In fact, we're not even going to we're going to end this Torah before any Jew gets into the promised land, by the way. This Torah is about getting to the promised land, but not getting into the promised land. Interestingly enough, that's why we say Haftorahs every Shabbat. Because they're thinking the promised land is going to be the solution to everything. This Jewish community that has evolved, that has all died from their sins in the desert, hey, we're going to go in and we're going to live in this perfect land and we're going to live happily ever after. And then you read the Haftorah. This one is the problem, that one's the problem, this one is the problem, that one's the problem. You can never really enter the promised land. Why does God say to Moshe, you cannot enter the promised land? He hit the rock. What was he supposed to do? And what does Moshe say to God when he confronts God at Mamad Har Sinai? God says, I want to kill them all off. His anger is out of control. Moshe is able to keep him. In a certain way, I think what God is saying to Moshe is, this is what I've learned from you, and this is what I have to teach you. It's at this level that I can't let you go because you too are suffering from the same thing that I'm suffering from. And I'm working on it, but I'm a God, so I have to be around all of the time. But you're ready to let go and end. And what God does then, which I think is the parallel for me between making clothes for Adam and Eve, making Moshe see the world from God's point of view, is he goes up to the mountain where Moshe is going to die and be buried. And he's the one who was with him when he died. That's an amazingly intimate piece too. And it says, and God buried Moshe there, and nobody knows where it is. And there never will be another prophet like Moshe, because Moshe and God were the only beings who could speak face to face. And that is the end of the love story. Meaning that is the transformation of God from one who creates and doesn't know how to connect to one who does. And out of this, but first I want to hear some discussion of this, about how it could touch you, how it is, there's something you like about this that helps you in your own life, that how it affects us in our relationship. That when things are hard, and you're working on relationship. It's funny because in the last 2 weeks I've had 3 calls from relatives, and they all said the same thing. They're young people involved in relationship. They said, I never knew it was going to be this hard. Don't you just, marry somebody and live happily ever after? I said, yeah, and maybe this story of the Torah is really telling us about that, about how it's difficult, and yet God keeps trying. And in the end is successful to find his bashert. But even with that, there is no promised land that we can be in, because it's a continuation of that dance that we're having. And that dance in itself has to be enough, unless it isn't enough. And that's what's called neurotic misery. That's what's called not being able to satisfied with the human condition. That's what Freud talks about in terms of saying the purpose of psychotherapy is to exchange for neurotic misery ordinary unhappiness. So that's what I'm taking out of this and learning from this, and would like to know if this touches any of you and how it touches you. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm very moved by your emphasis on relationship. That seems to be really key. And a parallel story to your talking about the relationship between us and God and Moses and God is from Levi Yitzchak Berditchev.
Hasidim love this, by the way. Hasidim talks a lot about God searching for man.
Right, and Levi Yitzchak actually, part that inspires me is he talks about refining our soul, kind of a tikkun. And in portion on Noah, he says that his soul root had to be refined, for when Abraham protested God, and then the ultimate was when Moses goes before God and says, take me, I'm with my people, what you were talking about. So it's kind of built in as part of creation that the highest tzaddik, to what we aspire to, is, that's part of creation, that there's going to be this conflict and even the urge from God for destruction, but then our role is to stand up to that, even if it seems inevitable.
Yes, and Moshe does that magnificently, doesn't he? And in a way, that's what that struggle is seen by some as anti-religious, and by others including myself, as the essence of religion. It's what religion is meant for and supposed to be, is our struggle with finding out how to be good enough. And ultimately knowing that that's all we can be, is good enough. Other people. Oops. Back, please.
I was just thinking of the story of Don Eden, and the first time I saw it as the relationship of a parent to a child or to children, and this thought of creating in your image and having certain expectations, but also wanting to shield your children from the outside world and form them the way you want them to be formed out other influences. And then they go and eat from the tree of knowledge, and suddenly the world is open to them, and God says, I don't want this anymore, and pushes them out. And so it seemed to me sort of a story of a parent who really doesn't know how to parent well, and that maybe we can learn.
And how God learns how to parent well, so well that he can do it without Moshe. That's the other thing I was thinking about, of why Moses needs to die. Because God needs to grow up in a certain way. God needs to take responsibility for himself, herself, themselves, perhaps. Because it really does, that trajectory I'm clear about, of starting from Adam and Eve and ending with Moses, being the development of the whole Torah, and teaching us what kind of relationships we're aspiring to. Please.
I'm very sympathetic to your point of view. I've always wanted to understand the Torah in such a way that God not only changes, but grows. And you've hit a lot of points, but can you give me a simple arc that tells how God started and what God evolved into, so that I can see that?
You want a simple arc? I thought I did give it to you. From Adam and Eve to Revelation, and the reaction to all of them, to an ending with Moshe. That development of God is what I see as God being able to tolerate, difference, to be able to yet hang in there and be committed without destroying everybody and everything. I think it's the struggle we have politically, religiously. You know, as people are saying, oh, we can never have a solution to what's going on in Israel because it's a religious war, and religious wars are never solved. And then I'm thinking, hundreds of years, all the wars were religious wars. You know, how will the French at peace with the Germans, at peace with us now, when they couldn't be for hundreds of years? It's how do you be good enough, I think, and realize that you give up this notion of Gan Eden, that there is no perfection, and it's not going to happen in reality. And yet, it can be good enough. That's what I think.
So you're convinced that the God...
I'm not convinced, no. I'm entertaining the notion of that this might be a helpful thing for me in my own searching around relationships, around being married to my wife for 52 years and still having some issues with her, really. And saying that it's not that it's bad. It's that it's the nature of, more than reality, religious life. It's the nature of religious life.
I won't say convinced, but you see God is somehow better at the end of the Torah than at the beginning of the Torah.
I don't know if I do really, but it helps me to understand it this way. Yeah. I can't convince you because I'm not convinced. But I see this as a possibility, and it helps me to understand the story in that way. Have you ever seen Into the Woods, the Stephen Sondheim?
Yes, I could start singing agony.
You can start seeing agony, right? Exactly. The notion that, you know, the end of the fairy tales is the intermission, and it goes on. Other people.
So
Judah?
one takeaway might be that we should be somewhat more comfortable with any of our general unhappiness.
That's one thing, yeah. And that, in fact, the world the world is full of conflict, but that conflict is not bad, necessarily. How you deal with conflict is bad, can be bad or good. But I think this notion of the world has never been this bad before. I lived through the 60s. It was worse then, in fact. And the historians who can go through stuff and see this ups and downs and ins and outs, are we going in a different way? Perhaps because we're so interdependent with each other. So climate change could wipe us all out, but it's not going to wipe us all out. It's going to wipe out the ones who are less prepared for it. And then somehow the world will lose some and have some, perhaps, unless we can all get together and share some things and develop new stuff, whether it's a new atomic reactor that what's this is talking about, Bill Gates is talking about, or something like that. Will we be able to do it? I had hoped so. I don't know if I believe it, but I'll pray for it. And that's what I'm feeling around that sense of the Torah. But I do know that God's relationship with Adam and Eve was very different than his relationship with Moses. And the relationship with Moses is done in such amazing terms in the Torah. And we still sing that. Lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od navi u'mabit mototo. It's like there was nobody like him. And very interesting, because he was an immigrant. He was a foreigner. And he was of us too. And maybe in our fighting the different parts of ourselves, I'm sure Moshe felt the same way. And perhaps God does too. That part, everything, I've given all of this to these people, and this is what the way they're treating me, and that's what God says. And, hey, I'm a God. I can learn how to deal with this.
So first of all, it's really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sort of thinking about who's God. Kind of hoping you'll fill out a little bit your understanding of what God is in our lives. What in your description is God's kind of a catalyzing agent for us, and a kind of a window through which to understand relationships. sacred about God, if anything? And what makes this a Jewish story?
It's a Jewish story because it's the Torah, right? So it's the book, it's our book. That's what I'm saying. It's our book, and it's the book that has become the sacred text for us for thousands of years. So what I think of is evolutionary psychology, or maybe evolutionary literature. I'm amazed that I read someplace that somebody who popularized Bach is considered one of the greatest composers of all time, right? For 100 years after he lived, nobody even knew about him. And then he was brought back and stuff like that. I think God is this story of God, because everybody has different stories of God, and that's their sacred text. For us, it's the question of how we're going to use it. So God is those values towards which you aspire, I think of. God is that which can make your life feel more meaningful, better. You connect you to other people of your group, of your community. But God essentially is a figment of our imagination, because God has to be, because we can never know God, by definition, right? So then, what God do we choose to have? The one who sees all of our lacks, sees how we can never be good enough, or is there to teach us in this story how we can be good enough? And that's what I struggle with. Please. What are we doing for time, by the way? 5 more minutes?
What I'm asking you to these two ideas, but do you think God created the world and it operates on certain principles? Or do you think God created the world and is involved in the world on an everyday basis?
I haven't the slightest idea. Seriously. And I said, I had a father. I mean, has to do with afterlife, but it also has to do with God. I had a father who believed when he was going to die, he was going to go visit his mother and his father, and that was the nature of the world. I happened to have actually the honor of being with my mother on the last night of her life. And my mother could be kind of a wild woman. I will not tell you the stories of my mother because it would take many hours, but that night, she was at the Brigham and Women's, and she said to me, "Earl, tonight I am going to die, and I'm going to ask only 2 things of you. A, that you let me die, because there was fights about that before, of whether she should die, and the second is, will you stay with me till the end?" And I thought, this is what I was created for, and had all of that therapy for. I'd be glad to do that, Mom. And having that time with her. So it is, I grew up, I was saying, needing to both believe in a God that was there and be a community of God that we could turn to, and God being the help me God. And to believe that might be just, a figment of our imagination. I have to be able to live my life being able to accept either one. And that's what I've learned to live with. So thank you all. Let me read to you this last, the 10 Commandments, and you can take this if you'd like, of relationship, as modeled by the God of the Torah, according to Earl Goldman. 1, it is not good to be alone. 2, it is not easy to be in relationship. 3, some conflict seems to be an integral part of every relationship, good or bad. 4, even with conflict, there can be compassion. I think that's a really key one. 5, God keeps trying and finally finds his bashert in Moshe. We too should learn to be resilient and keep trying, and maybe we'll find who we're looking for. 6, Moshe teaches God so much and vice versa. A good relationship is mutual. 7, we can only be good enough and never perfect, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Thus, number 8, we can never enter the promised land like Moshe, we are always striving, and we must be satisfied with being good enough. 9, even if we could enter the promised land, it's no Garden of Eden, as the Haftarahs tell us over and over. And 10, this may be enough. Or is it? Thank you so much for coming here, for sharing this with me. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
10 till 10.